Welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Always exciting to be back.
Today we're going to be tackling something I think we can all relate to,
Yeah.
the impact of technology on human connection. We're going to be taking a look at excerpts from a TEDx talk by Tom, who really advocates for prioritizing human interaction, despite all the incredible advances in technology we have. So how do we actually stay connected in this increasingly tech-driven world?
Well, it's a good question, and it's one I think a lot of us are struggling with these days.
Right.
Tom starts his talk with this scenario that I think many of us have probably experienced. Picture this. You're going through a whole travel day.
Right.
You check in online, order food through an app, airport navigation on your phone, arrive at the hotel. Everything's managed through your devices. And then it kind of hits you. You haven't actually had a single real interaction with another human being.
It's like we've traded those spontaneous connections for efficiency and convenience. Have you ever felt that? That's sort of like...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sterile efficiency.
Totally. And I mean, Tom highlights that trade-off is like a core consequence of our tech-filled lives, right?
Yeah.
He actually went through the trouble of simulating that same travel day,
Wow.
but set in the 1970s,
Okay.
pre-smartphone era. And the result, he found over 20 potential points of interaction
Oh, wow.
just in that one day.
That's a huge difference. It really makes you think about all those missed opportunities, even just those small moments of connection we might have had
Exactly.
if things were different.
Yeah, and I think it all underscores Tom's point that we as humans, we're really wired for these connections. He actually cites research that indicates strong social bonds. Believe it or not, they're linked to lower crime rates. And I was surprised to learn that studies show that even something as simple as having a community garden, because it fosters interaction between neighbors,
Right.
can contribute to a safer neighborhood.
So it's not just about individual well-being. It's like the health of our communities depends on it, on those
Yeah.
connections as well.
It really does. He even makes a parallel between social isolation and things that we know are detrimental to health, like smoking or obesity.
Wow.
There's a growing body of evidence that suggests that this lack of connection can be just as harmful.
That's pretty scary. So to sort of bring this idea to life, Tom and his team, they actually started this free hugs campaign where they go to different places and offer hugs to strangers.
Oh, yeah.
It's just this simple act meant to kind of demonstrate the power of human touch, I guess.
It's an interesting approach, although I do wonder if some people might find it a little superficial. I mean, does a brief hug actually address the deeper complexities of loneliness and isolation,
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe it's more about breaking down those barriers.
Yeah.
A symbolic gesture of openness and willingness to connect
Yeah.
rather than actually trying to solve the whole problem.
I can see that, yeah. And Tom shares a really interesting anecdote from one of their hug events at a U.S. military base. A cafeteria lady. I think she was initially a little resistant, but when they offered her a hug, she was visibly moved by it.
Wow.
It seemed to mean something more to her,
Yeah.
like a recognition she maybe hadn't felt in her work environment.
It's amazing how those small gestures can have such a profound impact on people. Now, speaking of approaches, Tom introduces what he calls the two-hat theory. He suggests we often kind of wear this technical hat, where we're prioritizing tasks and efficiency, but we need to make an effort to switch to a human hat that values connection
Okay.
more than just getting things done.
I see what he's getting at. But
Yeah.
does it oversimplify things a bit? I mean, there's a lot of factors that influence human connection, right?
Right.
I mean, look at our online lives. I mean, that raises questions about the nature of connection in and of itself.
That's a great point. I mean, is technology creating new types of connection,
Well,
even as it maybe diminishes traditional ones? Like, look at the rise of online communities and support groups and all that. It's interesting.
It is, like this paradox.
Yeah.
Tom doesn't seem to really address technology's potential for connection in the talk. He focuses more on the need to be present in our physical interactions.
Okay. Well, to kind of illustrate that importance of those in-person interactions, he shares a story about a student named Ryan who has Asperger's and really struggled to make friends and was bullied.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a tough situation.
Yeah.
And I think it's particularly relevant because it
Yeah.
highlights the potential consequences of isolation, right?
Yeah.
Especially for people who maybe already face social challenges.
Right.
It makes me think about the link between social isolation and mental health,
Oh, yeah.
which is something we're seeing more and more of these days.
Definitely an important issue. And there's a turning point in Ryan's story where these two student leaders just reached out to him, just included him in their group.
Oh, wow.
And it had a huge impact on his outlook.
It shows how simple acts of kindness and inclusion can really make a difference.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we all play a part in fostering a more connected society.
Right. Absolutely. And I think Tom's suggesting that while technology has its place, we really have to be deliberate about creating those human-to-human moments.
Yeah.
And his two-hat theory, even if it is maybe a little bit simplistic, at least gives us a starting point for being more mindful about how we're interacting.
Right. But how do we actually translate that awareness into action?
That's a great question. And that's something we can explore further when we come back. Let's take a moment to gather our thoughts, and then we'll delve into Tom's specific strategies for creating more connection in our lives.
So we've talked about how important it is to be intentional about connection. What are some of the strategies that Tom suggests to actually achieve that?
Yeah, he offers a few practical approaches, and I think it all starts with awareness, right? Being aware of how technology, even though it's super useful, it can impact our interactions. Like, are we constantly checking our phones when we're with other people?
It's like second nature now, isn't it? But I do wonder, how much does just having our phones out, even if you're not actively using them, how much does that actually affect our conversations?
Well, Tom argues that even a visible phone can create a barrier.
Oh, interesting.
It sends this message that we're not fully present. It's a potential distraction, even if we don't mean it to be.
So it's not even about the time we spend on our devices, it's the fact that they're just there.
Exactly. And one of his simplest suggestions is to create phone-free zones.
Okay.
Like meals with family and friends, dedicated time with loved ones, times when those devices are just completely out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, setting those boundaries seems really important, especially if we want to show the people we're with that they're our priority.
Exactly. And it's not just about the devices themselves. Tom actually emphasizes something we often take for granted: eye contact.
Eye contact. That seems almost too basic.
Right.
Isn't that something we just do naturally?
You'd think so, but how often are we really looking at the person we're talking to as opposed to glancing at a screen or looking around the room or whatever?
You know, now that you mention it,
Yeah.
it does seem harder to maintain that genuine eye contact these days.
Yeah.
It's like our attention is always being pulled in so many directions.
Right. And Tom's point is that eye contact signals that we're present, that we're listening, engaged. It creates this sense of intimacy and connection. It's like this nonverbal cue that says, I see you and I value what you're saying.
It's amazing how much those nonverbal cues actually matter.
Yeah.
It's not just the words, it's how we say them, the
Right.
energy we bring to the conversation.
And connected to that, he also talks about active listening,
Okay.
which is more than just hearing the words. It's about truly absorbing what's being said, asking clarifying questions,
Right.
demonstrating that you're genuinely interested in the other person's perspective.
We talk about active listening all the time,
Right.
but how many of us really do it?
Yeah.
It takes a lot of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Like noticing when we interrupt or when we're already thinking about our response before the other person's even finished talking.
You're so right. It's a skill that you have to practice. Tom actually suggests paraphrasing what someone said,
Interesting.
just to make sure you understand and to show you're paying attention. It shows you're not just waiting for your turn to speak,
Right.
but that you're actually engaging with their thoughts and feelings.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
I bet that really helps avoid misunderstandings,
Yeah.
especially in difficult conversations.
Exactly. Now, this one might surprise you. Tom also stresses the importance of vulnerability in building connection.
Vulnerability. How does that even work?
Right.
It seems kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Wouldn't we want to show our best selves when we're trying to connect with people?
Yeah, that's what we usually think.
Yeah.
But Tom argues that when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to share our authentic selves, it actually creates deeper trust and intimacy. It lets people see us for who we really are, imperfections, and all which can be really bonding.
So it's about taking the risk to be truly seen.
Yeah.
Even if that means showing our flaws or weaknesses.
Right.
That takes courage.
It does. But like Tom says, we can't really connect with others if we're always hiding behind a mask.
True.
And there's research that shows that vulnerability can be contagious. When one person is open and honest, it creates a space for others to do the same. And that can really deepen relationships.
Makes sense. It's like the shared humanity, recognizing that we all have struggles and that we're not perfect. But how do we know when to be vulnerable? And with whom?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something we want to do with just anyone.
That's a really good point, and Tom acknowledges that. It's about choosing relationships where we feel safe, supported,
Right.
where there's mutual trust and respect.
Okay. And kind of continuing with this idea of nonverbal communication.
Yeah.
Tom also mentions the power of touch.
And he's not just talking about more free hugs, although those are great.
Yeah.
He's talking about incorporating appropriate physical touch into our everyday interactions, like a pat on the back,
Right.
a handshake, even a gentle touch on the arm. These can convey warmth and connection in a way that words sometimes can't.
You know, I read somewhere that physical touch releases oxytocin,
Right.
the cuddle hormone,
Right.
and that's linked to trust and bonding.
Right.
It makes you think that maybe in our digital world where we don't touch as much,
Yeah.
we're missing out on those hormonal benefits.
Right. Like we're touch deprived,
Yeah.
and that can affect our well-being.
I wonder if we're becoming less comfortable with touch as a society.
That's a really interesting question.
And what are the implications of that?
Yeah. But Tom's message is clear.
Mm.
We have to be more mindful about incorporating those small gestures of physical touch into our interactions. They really do make a difference.
So it's not about these grand gestures,
Right.
but about those subtle moments of physical connection
Yeah.
that reinforce our bonds with each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he stresses that it needs to be appropriate, obviously, respecting boundaries and cultural norms.
Of course.
But even something as simple as a high five or a fist bump can go a long way in conveying camaraderie and support.
It's about being aware of those little ways we can connect on a physical level.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I'm noticing here? A lot of what Tom's suggesting,
Yeah.
it's about being more present, more intentional in our interactions.
You're absolutely right. It's not about these huge changes. It's about those small, everyday choices we make that can have a big impact on our connections.
It's about shifting from just existing to actually engaging with the people around us.
Yeah,
Recognizing that relationships take effort.
absolutely. And Tom actually challenges us to step outside our comfort zones.
Mm.
He suggests things like striking up conversations with strangers, joining groups or activities that interest us,
Mm.
putting ourselves out there to meet new people and have new experiences.
I can see how that would be intimidating for a lot of people,
Right.
especially those who are more introverted.
Right.
Is there a way to do that without feeling overwhelmed or pressured?
Tom acknowledges that it can be scary to step outside our comfort zones, but he says that we often limit ourselves by sticking to our routines and our same social circles. When we push ourselves beyond those boundaries,
Yeah.
we open ourselves up to all these possibilities for connection and growth.
So it's about challenging our own limitations.
Yeah.
And being open to the unknown.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything drastic. It could be as simple as trying a new coffee shop
Okay.
or striking up a conversation with someone in line at the store.
Yeah.
You never know where those small interactions might lead.
Right. Those little interactions can sometimes turn into the most meaningful connections.
And speaking of openness, Tom also emphasizes the power of gratitude.
Gratitude. How does that fit in?
Well, he suggests that when we focus on the good things in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
when we really appreciate the people around us,
Yeah.
it naturally strengthens those bonds. It shifts our focus from what we lack to what we have,
Okay.
which can make us feel more content
Mm-hmm.
and connected.
So it's about cultivating a mindset of abundance,
Yeah.
recognizing all the good things we have in our lives.
Exactly.
Hmm.
He even recommends keeping a gratitude journal.
Oh, interesting.
Just taking a few minutes each day to write down things you're grateful for.
Yeah.
It sounds simple,
Mm.
but it can really change your outlook.
I've heard about that.
Yeah.
It's about training your brain to focus on the positive,
Yeah.
which can impact your mood
Yeah.
and your relationships.
And gratitude can be expressed to others, too.
Right.
Telling people how much you appreciate them,
Mhm.
acknowledging their kindness and support.
Yeah.
Those little acts of affirmation can strengthen those bonds so much.
It's about making sure those feelings are known, not keeping them to ourselves. Expressing gratitude can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And finally, Tom talks about giving back to others as a powerful way to foster connection.
Giving back, like volunteering or donating to charity.
Those are definitely ways to do it, but it can also be simpler than that, like
Okay.
helping a neighbor, offering a listening ear to a friend,
Mm.
even just doing something kind for a stranger. These acts of service create this sense of purpose and connection to something bigger than ourselves.
It's about contributing to the well-being of others,
Yeah.
recognizing that we're all connected
Right.
and that our actions have a ripple effect.
Exactly. And Tom says that when we shift our focus from ourselves to helping others, it can be surprisingly fulfilling.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're part of something larger,
Right.
a community that thrives when we support each other.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together,
Mm.
that our well-being is tied to the well-being of others, and that serving others however we can is not only good for them,
Right.
but it's good for us too.
I love that. You know, listening to Tom talk about all these strategies,
Yeah.
it really makes me think that connection is an ongoing process. It's not a destination, it's a journey.
Right.
This constant effort to nurture our relationships and to
Yeah.
build new ones.
It's about weaving those threads of connection into our everyday lives.
Yeah.
It's not always easy, but it's so worth it.
And as Tom's story about the cafeteria lady shows, even the smallest acts of kindness
Right?
can create a ripple effect,
Mhm.
impacting not only the person we're kind to,
Yeah.
but ourselves as well. We all have the power to make a difference,
Yeah.
to create a more connected and compassionate world.
It's inspiring, isn't it?
It is. So before we move on, I'm curious, which of Tom's strategies really stood out to you?
That's a good question. I think I'm particularly drawn to the idea of creating those phone-free zones.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I've been trying to do.
Yeah.
But hearing Tom talk about it has given me this renewed commitment to it.
Okay.
I really want to prioritize those unplugged moments of connection.
Yeah.
And I'm also inspired to be more intentional about expressing gratitude,
Yeah.
both to myself
Mm.
and to the people around me.
Right.
It's so easy to take things for granted.
Yeah.
And I think consciously acknowledging them
Mm.
can really change how we experience our relationships.
I love that. Those are great takeaways.
Yeah.
I'm with you on the phone-free zones.
Yeah.
It's a constant battle, but it's worth it.
It is.
I'm also really intrigued by the gratitude journal idea.
Mm-hmm.
Seems so simple,
Yeah.
but powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to see how it might affect my perspective.
Maybe we could keep each other accountable,
Oh, yeah.
share our experiences, and encourage each other along the way.
I'm totally up to that.
Cool.
Accountability is always helpful when you're trying to form a new habit.
Definitely. You know, hearing Ryan's story
Mm.
really made me think about my own role in creating a more inclusive environment.
Okay.
I want to be better about reaching out to people who might be feeling isolated
Mm.
or left out,
Mm-hmm.
to be there for them
Yeah.
and support them in any way I can.
That's wonderful. It reminds me that we all have this responsibility
Yeah.
to make the world a more connected and compassionate place.
Right. It's not just about what we do individually.
Right.
It's about creating a culture
Yeah.
that values those connections.
Absolutely. And that's actually a perfect transition to what we're going to be talking about in our next segment.
Okay.
We're going to dive into Tom's ideas about building a culture of connection in our communities
Mm-hmm.
and workplaces.
That's a great topic,
Yeah.
especially as we wrap up this part of our conversation.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to hear what he has to say about that.
Me too. It's clear that Tom's passionate about this,
Mm-hmm.
and his ideas have definitely given us a lot to think about. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll be back to continue our deep dive into the fascinating world of human connection. All right, so we've explored how technology affects our connections and looked at some ways to be more intentional in our interactions. But what about creating a culture of connection on a bigger scale, like in our communities and workplaces? What does that even look like, and how do we start?
Well, it's a question that goes beyond just what we do as individuals, right? It's about collective responsibility.
Yeah.
And Tom talks about this in his talk, emphasizing that a culture of connection isn't just some nice-sounding idea. It's actually really important for our communities to thrive and for our workplaces to be successful.
So where do we even begin with that? Is it all about company picnics and team building activities?
Well, those things can help, but Tom suggests it goes much deeper than that. He thinks it starts with leadership. Leaders who really prioritize connection. They set the example and create an environment where people feel safe to be themselves and connect authentically with others.
Okay, so it's about setting the tone from the top down. But what does that actually mean in practice? Is it just about being friendly and approachable?
It's definitely part of it, but Tom argues it's more than just being nice. It's about actively creating a sense of belonging, a shared purpose. It's about making sure everyone feels seen and heard and valued for what they bring to the table.
So it's not just about being friendly, it's about making people feel like they truly matter.
Exactly. And there are specific things leaders can do to make that happen. Tom suggests things like regular team building activities, but not the superficial kind. He's talking about activities that encourage real interaction and shared experiences so people can connect on a deeper level.
It's about going beyond those surface level interactions and creating opportunities for more meaningful connections.
Exactly. And it's also about making sure communication is open, creating ways for people to share ideas and concerns, even personal stuff. It's about building trust and transparency.
It's like creating a space where being vulnerable isn't seen as a weakness, but as a way to build stronger connections.
Right. And it's not just on the leaders. Tom emphasizes that we all have a role to play in this.
Okay, so what can we do as individuals, even if we're not in charge?
Well, it starts with being mindful of how we interact with others. Are we being inclusive? Are we reaching out to people who might be feeling left out? Are we creating opportunities for connection, even small ones?
It's about taking responsibility for our own actions and recognizing that we all contribute to the culture, even if we don't realize it.
Exactly. And it's also about speaking up if something doesn't seem right. If you see someone being treated unfairly or excluded, it's our job to say something, to challenge that behavior, make things more inclusive and fair.
It's about creating a culture where everyone feels safe and supported, and where people are held accountable for their actions.
And it's about celebrating diversity, not just tolerating it. Tom highlights how important it is to welcome the unique perspectives and experiences that everyone brings to the table.
When you say diversity, what do you mean? Just demographics?
It's part of it, but it goes beyond that. It's about diversity of thought, experience, background. It's about understanding that our differences actually make us stronger. They enrich our perspectives and help us grow.
So it's about going beyond what we're comfortable with and welcoming the richness that comes from interacting with people who are different from us.
Yeah. And it's about challenging our own biases and assumptions, being open to new ideas and ways of thinking.
It sounds like creating this culture of connection takes a lot of humility. Being willing to admit that we don't know everything and that we can learn from others, even if they're different from us.
You got it. It's about fostering curiosity and openness, a place where people feel safe to ask questions, challenge ideas, and learn from each other.
And this might seem a little out there, but Tom also talks about rituals.
Rituals, like what? Secret handshakes and chants.
Haha, not quite. He's talking about creating shared experiences that reinforce a sense of community. He gives an example of a company where they have this weekly tradition of sharing what they're grateful for, just taking a few moments to appreciate their colleagues.
That's such a nice idea. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just something small that strengthens those connections.
Right. It's about those little rituals that bring a sense of connection into our daily lives. It could be something as simple as having coffee together regularly or starting meetings with a quick check-in where everyone shares a little update about their lives.
Those shared moments, even the small ones, really help build that sense of camaraderie.
And it's not just in the workplace. Think about community rituals, festivals, parades, even just hanging out at the local coffee shop. Those shared experiences, those moments of joy or sadness that we experience together, they're what bind us together as a community.
It's about recognizing the power of those shared experiences, those moments that connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
You know, listening to Tom talk about all this, I'm struck by the idea that creating a culture of connection isn't just about being nice or friendly. It's about creating a space where people feel seen, heard, and valued for who they are.
Yeah, it's about fostering that sense of belonging, of being part of something bigger than yourself. It's understanding that how we feel is connected to how our communities and workplaces are doing.
It's about building a world where everyone feels like they belong, where they can be themselves, and where they feel like they can contribute what makes them unique.
And that's a pretty amazing goal to work towards. It's a good reminder that connection isn't a luxury. It's something we need. It's the foundation for a good society, a thriving workplace, and ultimately a good life.
So well said. As we wrap up this deep dive into human connection, what are some of the key things you're taking away from this? What really stuck with you?
For me, Tom's message is a powerful reminder that connection doesn't just magically appear. We have to work at it, both individually and together. It takes effort and a willingness to push ourselves outside of our comfort zones, but it's so worth it.
I completely agree. And it's a journey, you know? It's about constantly learning and growing and strengthening our connections with ourselves and the people around us. It's about understanding that we're all connected and that everything we do, big or small, can make a difference in making the world a more connected and compassionate place.
It's about really being present in those moments of human interaction, those shared experiences, and looking for opportunities to build understanding and support. In a world that feels more and more divided every day, Connection is what brings us together, makes us stronger, and ultimately makes life worth living.
So beautifully said. As we move forward in this crazy world, let's remember the power of connection. Let's be intentional in our interactions, reach out to the people around us, and work towards a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
Let's make connection a priority, not something we just think about later. Let's make it part of our daily lives, our communities, and our workplaces. And let's remember that even the smallest actions can have a big impact.
That's a great way to put it. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of human connection. We hope it's given you some new ideas and inspired you to build more meaningful connections in your own life. Until next time, stay connected.